Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thank you for spending some of your valuable time with me today. On this episode, I'm talking to Adam Brandon from the Independent Center, which you can find at independentcenter.org. Adam was previously the president of FreedomWorks, a political advocacy group which dissolved this past spring after it turned out their conservative and libertarian principles just don't jibe with the big government populism of Trump's Republican Party. So out of those ashes, he started the Independent Center, and he's here to talk about the rise of independent voters and how he thinks they're going to affect elections this year and beyond. It's a really great conversation about how the political realignment going on today, not only between the left and the right, but the voters who feel like they can't fit into either party. And so I hope you really enjoy it. One quick note, or two quick notes, I guess, technically. We had some internet problems at a couple of points, and so this audio gets a little bit wonky at a couple of points. So apologies for that. As a guy whose only formal post-high school education is in audio production, I feel like I have failed you. Second caveat, we recorded this last week and I finished up production over the weekend before I went on vacation. I'm on vacation right now as you're listening to this. And so, who knows what kind of crazy things have happened in the campaign or the world since I have finished this episode. So apologies if there's anything that's out of date. I don't think there will be. It's more of a long-term conversation that I had with Adam. So I think it will all be good, but who knows? We'll see what happens. All right, here's my conversation with Adam. Adam, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate this opportunity. I think it's really interesting. We've looked at some data, and if you're under 40, your primary news source is often podcasts. And I think this is the most important medium in our country right now. So any chance I have to be able to have a long form conversation, I will always jump at it. So I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, I think this is a fun way to do it, especially because I agree, podcasts are just a better way to get, let's talk about a single subject for an hour. You just don't get that in a lot of other ways. Obviously, like long form articles are great, but just seems like those are fewer and far between, as there's just not as much money in that, I guess. And so people aren't doing it. So.
Well, but what's interesting, though, is if you look at the different, and we're going to talk a lot about the generational shift going on in America today, because I think we're so focused on the horse race of this election and what Trump said and his Biden dropping that we forgot that we're living in a momentous transition from the baby boomers to the millennials.
Yeah.
And I'm Generation X, and very Generation X. We're just going to get skipped right over.
Stuck in the middle, yeah.
But what I find is that the baby boomers love television.
Yeah.
They love that. It's like political entertainment. They love watching TV. They grew up with TV. My parents in Cleveland, it's like my dad watches Fox and then they turn it over to CNN so that my mom can watch CNN, and they kind of cancel each other out. But, when I talk to my friends, it's all like, hey, you got to check out this podcast, and it's so much more in depth of that conversation. And I think that when I'm looking at the good news for the future of the country, it's the fact that people are turning for things like this for their information is a lot better than turning to television. Yeah,
there are some tricky parts there, though, because there are I think that media in general has become less trustworthy because not only are mainstream media sources becoming untrustworthy, but sometimes with podcasts or YouTube or pick the sort of independent things, sometimes there's a lack of credibility there because how do I know you're telling the truth? You're just like one guy somewhere. So it's hard. It's a little hard to navigate because I feel like the people I talk to, my friends and family and things like that, the most common thing that they come to me with is, okay, I've heard this and I've heard this. They both can't be true. Those things are in conflict with each other. So someone's lying, but how am I supposed to know who is, and it's kind of this hard thing. So yeah, I love podcasts when you find the right person, or YouTube or all these kind of things. When you find someone that's, especially what I love about YouTube and podcasts specifically is they can be so niched down. Someone can be just like an expert in cryptocurrency and you can listen to that podcast, or someone's an expert in, water management. I don't know. There's just all these weird things that you can learn about and do much deeper dives than I feel like we ever could with sort of the traditional television thing.
It used to be education can continue now, and we don't have to go and get degrees. Like
right.
The amount of information that is available for us to learn and it's almost a problem. We have this information overload.
Yeah.
Like I wanted more than one choice of peanut butter, but now we got 50 choices of peanut butter. I didn't know I wanted jalapeno melon peanut butter, but man, here we go.
Hey, anything we can put jalapenos in, I'm for.
But I think if you look at politics, we're living in a very different world than our parents, than our grandparents. Things are more confusing.
Yeah.
There's more variance to it. The answers are less complex. And so again, we're talking about the podcast forum, but if you look at, I think the reason why it's been successful is it allows you to get into the complexity.
Yeah.
And so I know I don't want to sound like Donald Rumsfeld here. Like there's a lot of things we know, and then there's things we don't know, and there's things we know we don't know.
The known unknowns.
And I think the future of the world looks like it's not as simple as they're good and they're bad. Yet our two political parties and the system that we have right now is still trying to cater to that binary world. And I just see that it's going to be outdated very quickly.
So that's what I think will be interesting about this conversation is that one way I heard it put on a podcast actually was it's weird that we've niched everything else down. So my Spotify is going to be totally different than your Spotify because it knows what kind of music I like. It's going to recommend that kind of music, and it can make me discover artists that no one knows. We're doing the same thing with podcasts. You can get down to really niche kind of stuff about your whatever industry you're in, or if you're kind of a single issue voter, you could just listen to podcasts about that issue. And at the same time, we only have two choices for political parties. And I don't know if I'm against that or not. There's a lot of people that blame everything on the two-party system, and I think that oversimplifies the problems with our politics. But it is interesting, at least, that we have. I mean, just look at, even if you go to television, the what you were calling the older demographics media source. There's hundreds of channels now. I mean, and even just going back to when you and I were kids, if you're Gen X, you're just a little older than me, I'm guessing. But we had dozens of channels, and that was crazy to our parents. Kind of, we only had 3 channels. So it does seem like everything's expanding out, and yet we still have these two choices. So let's talk about that, sort of the political realignment and the rise of independence. So tell us a little bit about what independencenter.org does and what you all are all about.
Well, we're new. And it's a collection of, let's say, like-minded individuals. We still haven't figured out roles and everything just yet. But I'm working with a couple friends of mine that I've trusted for a long time, and some new friends. Particularly, there's a pollster by the name of Brett Lloyd, who was Trump's pollster in 16 and 20.
Okay.
He was the first person to call me in 16 and tell me Trump was going to win. And I'm like, no way, really? After the Access Hollywood video, and he said, look, on our model, he's doing well with swing voters, independents in Pennsylvania and Michigan, and that's probably the way that he's going to win. And then Brett was the first person to call me. This was in 2019 after he did the campaign's first poll. And he goes in and he briefs the president and says, hey, we're going to lose.
Yeah.
And he gets fired. Right.
Yeah.
And but he looked at it, and it's like those demographics that you needed to move, that you moved, you lost.
Yeah.
And the way that he looks, and he taught me how to look at polling and information differently. And so it's kind of like in the universe out there, we have this thing called dark matter, but we don't really know what it is. Just know it's powerful and we can pick up on it. And that's the independents in American politics. They're dark matter. We don't know what they are just yet.
Yeah.
Or at least we didn't. But we know they're important, and we know when elections come down to things, we don't know you need to get those folks. But what Brett and I did is we went down this odyssey, and along the way we picked up some crazy creatures to join us, an expert in AI, and a business professor who's into marketing, an old colleague of mine that I worked on 20 years ago on the McCain campaign, and we started doing a deep dive into who these independents are. And that, when we saw the results, that changed everything, absolutely everything for me. And when I started understanding, so what happened then was in the 2022 midterms, remember everyone was talking red wave. Mm-hmm. Well, we had our model and said that there was no possibility for a red wave. And a lot of that was using this AI algorithm to watch what people were talking about. And no one was talking about the issues that the swing voters were not talking about the issues that matter to Republicans.
Yeah.
So like right now, if you talk to Republican, everything is about the border and immigration.
Yeah.
But you go outside of Team Republican, there's other issues that matter. And so what we started doing is figuring out who these independents were. And so number one, they're the younger, you're millennial or below, you're over 50% independent.
Yeah.
Even my generation, Gen X, is like 40% independent. Now, if you go over boomers, they're like 25, 30% independent. So the younger you get, the more independent you go. So this realignment that we're living through, you're going to have a smaller, pure Republican Party, a smaller, pure Democratic Party, and everyone else is going to go into this middle. But what's going to start to happen is it used to be you get your base and a handful of the swing voters. In a lot of critical places, it's going to be the other way around. You got to get the swing voters, then you got to pick off a chunk of the base. And that's going to fundamentally reorient American politics.
Well, we're also going through a political realignment just with the parties too. We're having the young old thing tends to be the same no matter what. Although when Biden was in the race, he was doing better with older voters than Trump was in some, or at least like compared to 2020 and 2016, Democrats were doing better with older people. That kind of swapped when Kamala came in, from what I've seen. And also there's just this weird realignment where working class is kind of moving towards basically the divide in the Republican and Democratic parties are you college educated or are you not? That's becoming more and more of a wedge that seems to be dividing the two.
Bingo. The younger you are, statistically, the more educated you are. Statistically, the younger generations are going to college at a higher degree or a higher rate. But when you look at the swing districts, these most important districts that decide everything in America, there's some commonality. So there's 435 congressional districts. Mm-hmm. Who's going to control Congress? Well, there's going to be 200 Republicans and 200 Democrats, guaranteed. Mm-hmm. It's those 35 and they'll decide everything. Now, in those districts, what we did the research on, whether it's Michigan 3 outside of Grand Rapids or Arizona 1, Scottsdale, Colorado 8, suburb of Denver, they're all exactly the same. They tend to be millennial, they tend to be college educated, they tend to be upper middle class, and they tend to be independent. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that they tend to be like pro-choice and pro-wall, or there's a combination of these various issue sets. So they no longer fit in either party. And so they swing back and forth. Well, what I'm seeing and what the Independent Center is, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but you look at that swing vote in those swing districts, I think that's where you're going to see the most interesting, innovative things happen in American politics in the next few cycles, because those are the only places that matter, and they're the places that are going to determine what gets done and not gets done in policy.
So here's what's weird about that to me this year in 2024 is that we've seen, now part of this I think is because Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, in my personal opinion, are terrible at politics. I think both of them are not very good politicians in the way that we think of politicians being good at talking to these different groups of people and that kind of stuff. And so maybe it's just that they're so bad at this, but it does seem like there's at least a weird thing happening where you're starting to see them align on all these policy issues. And it seems to be because they know that those gettable voters they have to get, this is just going to be such a close election that they're trying to get very, like the stats I saw, like the Pew Research says that basically like 10% of the country are true independents, where they're not. There's a lot of people that are independents that are really leaning one way or the other pretty consistently. They pretty much are always voting for Democrats or they're always voting for Republicans, and they just don't want that negative polarization kind of that comes along with the baggage of saying you're a Republican or a Democrat. But for those like 10% of people that are true independents, they're also, it sounds like, at least what I've read and noticed, is that they tend to be not that interested in politics. And those are probably going to be the people that swing this in Pennsylvania, Georgia, those kind of places. So it seems like they're literally going to the lowest common denominator and trying to get those people. But it's weird because for people that do pay attention to politics, it feels really strange for all of a sudden Kamala Harris to be pro-wall or Donald Trump all of a sudden is pro-choice. Yeah. There's these just weird things that are happening that you would have just, even 6 months ago, you would have said, I wouldn't have taken that bet, right?
So I got to push back on that assumption, though, because this assumption that it's 10%, I think it's much higher than that. Much, 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 much higher.
You think that don't like lean one way or another, even?
So I think it's probably closer to 40%.
Okay.
And here's my reasoning why, is that if you even look at the mechanics, so this is why working with a person, the pollster who's just excellent on data stats, and then the AI person helps me sort through all this data, is that what you start to see is that most of these data sets are somewhat corrupted by how the data sets are even set up. So I'll give you an example. If I ask you what your favorite choices of ice cream are, and there's 3 choices, right? You could have chocolate, you could have strawberry, and you're like, oh, I want strawberry. Strawberry. And they're like, okay, but let me ask the question again. You can like strawberry, but if you had to choose between chocolate and vanilla, what do you want? Well, I want strawberry. Yeah, but you choose between chocolate and vanilla.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the polling, it forces people into that. But the question is when you give them a potential third choice, in some of these districts, they'll take it. Yeah. And so where's where we're watching this play out? What is the greatest shocker of this election that could potentially happen that no one is talking about? And that's the Senate race in Nebraska, where you've got an independent who's now up in the race against the Republican. And the problem is that there's no Democrat in the race. The Democrat did drop out. But what you're starting to see is where the independent is just grabbing this huge swath of people who are just so sick of both parties and enough Democrats to potentially upset a safe Republican. Why is Andrew struggling in Texas? Well, he's not struggling with your base Republican voter. He's struggling with the college-educated professional woman in Houston who probably is going to vote Republican the rest of her ticket for the most part, but just like some of the tone and some of the other stuff that cruises. So you know who these groups are. And when they start seeing they have another choice, they take it. But we've never given them another choice. So I predict right now, when you get the mid and coming up in 2 years, you're going to start to see some independents running and winning in places. And that's going to be this huge shocker. Places like California, just uniparty rule. I don't know if the Republican Party will ever be able to challenge, but you can imagine in a place like California, a gay Asian guy from Los Angeles who's very fiscally conservative running and winning in that state. So you start to hear these different persons, different people, and different combinations start to take this independent mantle and do things that haven't done before. But one thing I will say about the independents, when we did push them and start trying to do all this research that we couldn't find research and do it ourselves, we found that the majority of these independents want a policy platform that is based on live and let live, like you do you, like doesn't matter, but there's like, we asked them about marijuana and some of the questions would come like, no, if you want to smoke a joint in your home, smoke a joint in your home. But please don't do it on the street where I got to explain to my kid what that smell is all the time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that nuanced middle of like, you do you, but as long as what you're doing you doesn't have to like push back on, we're not going to have, tolerance is not acceptance. It's that we could be different and still live in a great, strong community. And then on the economic issues, what we found that this community is looking for is they want more choices. They feel they don't have enough housing choice. They don't have enough choice in retirement. They don't have enough choice in education. They don't have enough choice in healthcare. So you build a political platform based on social tolerance and choice. That's what these independents are looking for. And we've also done the studies that show it's actually very clustered together. This is what the independents believe. They borrow from both parties. And even on the Republican and Democratic side, there's a wide variety of issues still in the Republican and Democratic Party, but the independents, ironically, are the ones who are clustering together on what they believe. And for someone like me who's on the center right, that is wonderful data to see because that shows that the center, a lot of our positions are incredibly strong for the future. Yeah. And they've just been crowded out by personalities at this point, but we've got a winning issue set going forward.
So one thing that's weird about that, though, is that we have this year where when it was Trump and Biden, they were like, we keep having these elections where somehow they outdo the last one in being the least popular candidates ever. It was something like 70% of Democrats wanted Biden off the ticket. Something like 80% thought that neither one of them were qualified to be the president. So, and yet no labels couldn't get anyone to run. I mean, it did seem like a year where you had the highest level of probability of a third party candidate actually being able to do something.
because it was the wrong. Everyone, it's not the presidency that's gettable. Be very clear.
Yeah.
It is really hard to get on the ballot.
Yeah.
And then you've got so many states that I don't care. You know, you're a blue dog Democrat, right?
Yeah.
I'd vote for a blue dog over a human being as long as that dog's Democrat.
Yeah.
Well, Republicans, Democrats do that. So you take a huge swath of the election. You know, we already know. So even if no labels was ultimately successful on the best they're going to do is make sure that no one got the election and it got kicked back to the House of Representatives.
Right, potentially,
that was their best opportunity. So what I'm pointing out is that to me, the real opportunity for independence only exists in about these 35 congressional districts.
Yeah.
That's it. That's where an independent can run and win. And if an independent ran and won in those districts, and let's say you had a landslide of 5 independents.
Yeah.
Well, put 5 independents in the House right now. Who's the speaker?
Yeah.
You would have a party of 5 Joe Manchins in the middle of the House of Representatives. And I think that is the true opportunity for the independents. It's not the presidency.
Yeah.
It's not even Senate. It's the House of Representatives, just because of the way that these swing districts have, with these millennial, independent, upper middle class, college educated folks who want both, both. That's where I see the political revolution happening in the next several years.
And talking about the numbers, because it's weird, looking into the rise of independence, like the history of people identifying, I guess like there's some methodology problems too, because most states until a couple years ago didn't release any of their voter registration data, right? So this was all like Gallup and Pew and polling places that were just asking people your ice cream question, essentially.
Right.
But since then, I guess there are like 30 states that do release that information. We can't really look at it because it's only 30 states. It doesn't include Texas, which obviously there's lots of people in Texas. So you kind of have to. I looked at kind of some of the swing states though, and they're basically evenly divided. Like you look at Arizona and it's basically like a third, independent,
right.
Republican, Democrat. So looking at those swing states specifically where those swing districts would be, I think that does flesh out correctly. Yeah. So, but what is the discrepancy between, I see some things like Gallup, for example, if you go back to 2004, it says that it's basically the same as it was today. It was 32% Republican, 40% independent, 28% Democrat, and today it's 29, 40, and 30. It rises and falls, and even just going back to last year, 1 year ago in August of 2023, 47% of people said they were independents. That's now 40 today. And I assume that just in a presidential election year, you're going to have more people going back because they're registering to be in primaries, right? Is that mostly what's happening?
Yeah. Yep. That's exact. So I think what you're looking at, though, is, again, I keep coming back to a broken record here, this difference in generations.
Yeah.
So how a baby boomer views an independent and how a millennial views themselves as an independent, they're actually different in how they look at it. But one thing I will note on those trends that you mentioned, they go up and down like the stock market, but you see one trend, and that is the independents are continuing to rise and the Democrats and the Republicans are continuing to go down. So I always look at Maricopa County right now, which is the dominant county in Arizona.
Yeah, it's where everyone lives, basically.
That's where everyone wins. I mean, it's not really Phoenix, it's Maricopa. I mean, Maricopa covers all of that. Like, that's where your population is. Well, again, if you look at the registration, it follows that trend. The independents are shooting up, and the Republicans and the Democrats are kind of cratering. And you hear all this, 100,000 more Republicans signed up. Well, 300,000 more independents.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I look at that as a ground. So I'm looking at states that are going to be ground zero for the independent revolution. It's going to be Colorado. It's going to be Arizona. And so I look at, again, it's concentrated, and that's where its power is. It's not dispersed. So even in a state like Arizona, a third. Okay, but you have very red areas and very blue areas.
Yeah.
But what we're starting to see in these swing districts is they're plurality independent. That's where things are going to get exciting. And these trends are going to pick up because every cycle, more and more of these younger people who come in are going to go independent. And so this gives, but what this gives the opportunity for the Republican and the Democratic Party to do is they're going to either have to figure out what's more important to me, just talking to my base all the time or going to get these other swing voters. And I don't know. I'm going to be very curious to see how the parties respond. But the good news for us as American citizens, they're going to have to start getting serious on actual policies. And you mentioned how Kamala and Trump are like throwing out all these. No, I'm not taking these things seriously.
Oh, no, not at all.
And you get an ice cream maker.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
no one believes this, that they're doing this. I have people talking about their economic analysis. I'm not looking at the economic analysis of their position.
Oh, totally agree. Yeah, it's not serious. The only thing that bothers me about it is, there's lots of things that bother me about it. I don't like pandering to voters with handouts. I think that's why we're in $33 trillion in debt for the most part. I guess what I'm wondering about that, though, so I agree. I think you're right that the congressional district stuff, those 35 seats that are a little bit more fluid, do seem like a good place for independents to be able to kind of gain some ground there. However, what concerns me is that, of course, I don't know every state that those 35 districts are in and what their rules are. But like, I'm in Oklahoma. If you're an independent, you can vote in the Democratic primary, but not the Republican one. I think there's 13 states that are like that, that are not like independents can't vote in both. They might be able to vote in one. Maybe they can't vote in any. I would think that as that happens, if independents get higher numbers in states, but they can't participate in a primary, to me, it seems obvious that those primary candidates are going to get more fringy to the left and to the right, because those people that are reasonable and go, this is ridiculous, have left the party and potentially can't. So that's the reason I'm still registered as a Republican. I'm like, if I register as an independent, I can't vote in any primaries in Oklahoma. Well, not any. I can vote in the Democrat, but I'm a conservative, so it's not very likely that I would. So that to me seems like a con in my specific state. I don't know if that matters other places.
Okay, you brought up 2 points. 2 points I got to get through. So the first one is the why. And this is the hard thing, and I talk to people about the whys, the mechanics. If you're running for office in Congressional District 1, and it's a solid Republican district, and you know that the rules are the way that they are, even if you don't believe this, the reason you're going to cater to the base and take the hardest of the hardcore issue is people forget how valuable their vote is. Yeah. And so what we're seeing is that there's just so few. You've got to separate yourself. So say in the crazy town stuff, it helps you cut out, right? It helps, when people are outraged by something that you're saying, well, it gets you that one click up on that story. So it's that competition for eyeballs is what drives you to be more fringy, right? Yeah. And then more conspiratorial. And because you're trying to give anything that red meat to that hardcore base. Oh, right. Yeah. So because the other thing that comes with that is money. We forget the power of grassroots dollars in politics. But we've got another trend that's coming up, because I would love to talk a little bit about money in politics and how I think the influence of money in politics is starting to collapse. Oh, yeah. And but that's what I think one of the things I'm watching in this cycle. There's going to be a lot of primary reform. There is a lot of primary reform on the ballot this cycle. And I'm very curious how that is going to turn out. But I think what you're going to start to see is that, look, if you're a private entity, the Republican Party, a private entity, the Democratic Party, why are taxpayers paying for your private party's elections? So to me, it's kind of like, if the Republican Party or the Democratic Party want to have closed primaries, fine, go pay for them. But if you're going to use taxpayer dollars, you got to open it up. So it's hard for me to see. So I think you're going to see some more reforms coming in that way. But and then the other thing so that's kind of like where you start seeing like why there's this reason that the fringe gets driven. Yeah. And then I think you're going to see some of these primary reforms. I think you're going to see, they're popping up everywhere, and they're wildly popular. And so you start seeing that. And I think that kind of gets into the next conversation of money in politics and why I actually see the importance of money in politics falling.
I think you're right. I think the parties, I am 100% on the sort of Jonah Goldberg train of the parties are not really strong. They're not. If they were strong, the Democrats wouldn't have let Bernie Sanders sniff the nomination in 2016, a guy that's not even a Democrat technically. They wouldn't have let Donald Trump sniff it if if Republicans really had, if the party really had the control that people think they have, they wouldn't have allowed Donald Trump to sniff the nomination in 2016. It's just plainly, they wouldn't have done it.
Look how the Democrats are adjusting.
Yeah.
They've already this is so significant for their next presidential nominee. They're not going to Iowa and New Hampshire anymore. Mm-hmm. They're starting in South Carolina, which means that type of politics in Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, that is handshake. Mm-hmm. I have a colleague of mine is from Iowa, and the joke is, well, what do you think of presidential candidate X? Well, I don't know. I've only met him 5 times.
Right.
So that type of politics is now gone for the Democratic Party, which means it's going to be more of and even they've changed their delegate stuff up a little bit. So they're kind of moving away from the primary.
Yeah.
And people forget, and this is really, I'm sure your listeners are smart enough to remember this, but this primary system that we have only came out of the Watergate scandals.
Yeah, it's only 50 years old.
Politics up, we'll open it up. Well, this is the unintended consequence of that. And I think we might be starting to go back towards the pre-Watergate. Maybe it's better when the fix is in with the political candidates. There's just some of these trends I see popping up.
I would love that because honestly, I think it's done nothing but degrade the level of candidate that we've gotten over the last 50 years that we've had primaries across the board, whether that's, because you go back to the money thing. Let's talk about that because that's really what this is all about. Campaign finance reform, another thing that had, I think, good intentions, but has messed everything up because the parties don't have the giant piles of money. It's PACs that have the giant piles of money, and PACs tend to be single issue. So you've got the NRA that's just all about the Second Amendment. You've got Planned Parenthood. It's all about, abortion rights and stuff. So as those people get the money and have all the money that can control essentially airwaves, things like that, backing candidates, the candidates have to go to those single issues and stuff, and they have to make those people happy. And so they can't make the people in the middle happy because they're not the people with the money. So how do you think that's going to shake out, or how do you think it has shaken out so far?
Well, this is again why this trend is going to force people to these independents into the middle, and they're making them. These are the trends that are making people politically homeless. But what's happening too is that it's as political, and I'm going to the science part, the strategy part of politics. You're able to really identify voters on an unprecedented level, even compared to a few years ago. And so, you're not getting my dad to vote Democrat. I don't care. You could drop $1 billion in ads on their house.
Doesn't matter.
He is not going to. And then my mom, you're not getting her. I mean, the only way my mom and dad don't vote is if they decide they're not going to go vote because they don't want to cancel each other out. So they're like, if we both stay home,
doesn't matter.
We just can't. Doesn't matter. In fact, we have a family. My parents are elderly, and my dad went to get milk, and my mom lost her mind, and she's like, "That SOB is going to vote." She jumped in the car and she ran and she voted, and then he came back with milk, and then he was like, then he just turned right around and he voted to go cancel her out, right? So those types of
little competition.
Yeah, those types of people. Think of all the money that's being dumped on them. It's just wasted.
Yeah. Well, we're not spending money. Yeah.
Pounded with this money. So then you start looking at Trump. Trump won the nomination on frickin' Twitter. Yeah. You have so I'm starting to see these big insurgency stories. It's about developing a more authentic relationship.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, Donald Trump got just an absolute ton of free media because everyone thought it was a circus and stuff. So he didn't have to pay for it, but he was on television and everything a ton. But yeah.
I think the old ways that you used to spend money on TV ads, that's the most expensive part of a campaign is the television ads. And so who's watching TV? They tend to be older.
Yep.
Well, they also know who they're voting for. So It's like when I look at, and people ask why I give the edge to Kamala right now in this campaign, is that she's spending a lot of money on get out the vote on the ground. Mm-hmm. And in push to shove, that chasing that ballot in is worth far more than anything you put up on TV. It just is. Yeah. And it's actually, ironically, one of the cheaper campaign technologies. It's because I think we're getting into an era where you're going to want to have an authentic, you're more likely to vote for an authentic candidate that you know and you trust. Hence, I think the independents have a clearer path at this because they could spend 1/10 of the money as a partisan, but they're trapped in that previous dynamic that you just talked about, where they have to do this to this group and this to this group and this to this group, and then they're just totally stuck. And it gives a free pass to the independent to go right down the middle in these districts. So the independent path, they're not. This is the other advantage. They're going to need money, but not nearly the amount of money that you see being kicked around in the other stuff.
No, you're right. And we're starting to see those stories come out, those leaks of Republicans being concerned that the Republicans basically don't have a ground game. That's where they've lacked, and Democrats do. It's weird because you've got all sorts of things happening over the last, we'll say, at least 10 years. You've got, like we mentioned, college educated kind of becoming more of a dividing thing between Democrats and Republicans. You're getting Republicans being more isolationist, more protectionism, more tariffs, which that's kind of flipped a little bit. Although now it's just everyone's pro-tariffs. There's really no one that is anti-tariffs at this point. So you're having all these policy things that are changing within the parties. You're also having realignment. You're having younger voters coming up. How do you think, what do you think the proof is that those younger voters, especially the ones that are under, let's say you are under the age of 30 right now. So all you've ever known really almost your entire adult voting ability life would be all you've known is the circus that includes Donald Trump. and
but it's entirely my nephews. This is all they've known.
This is all they've ever known. And so I wonder what their motivation for being independent is. I wonder if it's because for people like me and you, I think we go, this is ridiculous. And these candidates are not worthy of anything. I mean, they're just not worthy of my time, my vote. And it seems like we're getting dumber. But if you're 28 right now, this is all you've ever known is this kind of circus.
So I'm 46. So I grew up in greatest era in American history, the 90s. God bless the 90s. And I being formed in that era, what was really interesting to me was that you had partisanship. Like Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, I'm sure would not really want to get a beer together.
Of course, yeah.
But stuff worked. Like you had government shutdown, but you never thought to yourself, this government is is failing. Yeah. We kind of look at it today as man, it's not working. And so I think even as partisan as it got, you felt there were certain parameters of safety and you could go out to dinner and not worry about things, where now politics has just seeped into everything. And that's what I worry about with my nephews is that I'm a maniacal Cleveland sports fan. I mean, you want to talk about a cross to bear. I'd be a Cleveland sports fan. Yeah. And it's really, I don't with my Cleveland Browns, I'm just used to just complete dysfunction. And I hear these stories about the 50s when it was such a good team. But I've never really experienced that outside a little bit of my 80s and when I was a little kid. And so my nephews feel the same way. But I think when I kind of talk to them, I think they would like for things to calm down a little bit. Yeah. And they would like them to not be so political all the time. And so I think that there's just this longing. And, and this is where I'm really going to go out on a limb here. When I look at this data sets that we're seeing on who the independents are, they look a whole lot like the Reaganites of the early 1980s. They're very optimistic. Mm-hmm. They are very excited about their economic prospects going forward. They're very concerned about a wide variety of issues. But that optimism that America's best days are coming up, they firmly believe that. They just believe that these problems we've got to solve. And so that optimism is what I'm thinking that you talk to my mother-in-law. I mean, she thinks the world is absolutely about to collapse. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Get your guns, get your gold, head for the hills. Younger people are yeah, we have problems, but we need to solve these problems. And then actually it's interesting is this younger generation, the debt, you mentioned the 33, which is going to be close. We're putting $1 trillion on every 100 days. It's going to be millennials mostly that pay for that. The stock market, hypothetically, with the higher interest rates and some of the other challenges that we're going to have, probably not going to perform as well as it's performed over the last 30 years, which is going to make savings a little bit harder. Home prices are not going down. They got real problems.
Real problems, yeah.
The millennials are who are going to have to deal with this.
Yeah.
It's not the baby boomers are going to be faced with this stuff. It's the millennials. So going back to the point, and I think this is, boy, am I bloviating on the response to this, but it goes back to your point here about why I think this generation is going to be different, and why I do see optimism, and why I do think that it even if they've never experienced more of a normal period, I think it's the seriousness of the issues that they're going to face. They're going to want serious adults.
I agree, and that's why I've said that I think if either party just got their act together 10% more than the other party, because I feel like at all points we have one party that's just like in flames and the other one that's like basically in flames, but a little less so than the other one. And it kind of like seems like that was Republicans in 2016. Democrats kind of swung back and were just the slightly more adult party in 2020.
Right.
But I think what's very obvious to me is that people are voting for two things. And I think this is obvious, but I don't see the point made enough, so maybe I'm wrong. I think your authenticity point is correct. That's what I've said over and over again. I think people want authentic candidates. I think that's the reason they don't like Kamala Harris very much, is because she seems inauthentic. Like she just... What is she? Like, who is she?
I don't know what she stands for anymore.
She changes how she talks. And Hillary Clinton did the same thing where she changes how she talked based on the audience she was talking to. And we have YouTube now. We can see this clip in real time from her talking to someone in the South and having a Southern accent yesterday to being in New York and not having that accent today. And I think that's what attracted people to Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. Now, I'm not saying Donald Trump is truthful, but he's authentic. No one would doubt that that's truly who Donald Trump is. It's not an act. He really is that way. And Bernie Sanders, I think, was the same way. And so I think that's what attracted people to those candidates specifically. We learned the wrong lesson and we thought, oh, you're supposed to be like Trump, or you're supposed to be super progressive like Bernie Sanders. And I think it's pretty clear from 2020 that was not the message people were trying to send in 2016 about Bernie Sanders, because all the super progressive people were out. Kamala Harris was out of the race in December of 2019, and she went full on the progressive thing. Elizabeth Warren similarly, and it didn't work out very well for them. And Joe Biden, meanwhile, is kind of, I'm the normal centrist guy. But what's weird about that is that he wins the primary in 2020 and the election based on being like normal and a little bit more centrist, right? Now, when we say center, I don't ever think Joe Biden has been in the middle of American politics. He's in the center of the Democratic Party is where he's always been. So he moves around, but he's not a centrist between the right and the left. He's a centrist in the Democratic Party, which is fine. That's how you maybe get stuff done. But it's like, okay, the lesson he learned, though, apparently was not that, because then he just only listened to the young, super progressive people, I feel like. And I think that's the reason he's been so massively unpopular, not just the age stuff. I think that's been a huge thing, too. I think people have been understandably concerned about his capabilities of doing the actual job. But also, he just went all in on all this stuff, like, let's forgive student loans. And
I've got to dig this back up. And I know I'm just a Google search away from this. I remember this very well. Right after he got elected, someone put together a meeting at the White House where they brought in all of these historians and they gave him a presentation on what makes a historic figure in a president. Yeah. And I think from that moment is when he decided, well, I want my legacy. And it became, I mean, this is, look, we have a problem with ego, right? And I think his ego took over. And for Joe Biden to be a successful president, it should have been just calm, nothing big, exciting, not on Twitter every day. And by the way, he also said when he was running, he indicated that he was only going to run, once. Right. And if he would have done that and he just would have been, quiet, competent Uncle Joe who's only running once, he probably would have gone down in history as like a Truman-esque figure, actually. Right. That's what the future historians would have kind of pegged him at. Now, I think he's going to come up as like his historical legacy is going to be a nice old guy who was completely overmatched for, way too old for his job and all the rest of it. So I don't think history is going to be very kind to him because he tried to do this switch. He wasn't even that successful at it either. Well, yeah, he barely won in 2020 and he ran like he had FDR's coalition in Congress. I mean, he ran the country as if he had 2/3 of the Senate and could pass anything he wanted. And I just think I think you're right. So the future this is going to be very interesting. So let's say Kamala wins the White House. the future of the Democratic Party is going to be very interesting, because is she going to then try and run for a second term?
Of course,
because I don't think it's going to stack up well for her. And then you've got Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, who's got a crazy, like 70% approval rating in the state.
Yeah.
And he's going to try and do kind of a centrist Democrat type pitch, which I think would be very well received. I mean, you're looking at the Democratic bench, they've got a lot of talent over there. So it's curious to see who would win, because my guess is that Kamala, she doesn't really have strong economic bona fides. So what's she going to try and lean in on? More of the social stuff, right? And I mean, that's what her track record has said. She's going to want to be the social president then. And I don't know, that's just going to antagonize, like, this next generation that we're talking about. Yes, they may be a little bit more progressive on the social issues per se, but not nearly as much as the Democrats think. Like, yes, they're pro-gay marriage, but look, they don't want their kindergartners learning about sex and things like that at school.
Yeah.
Like, and this is probably from progressive people. It's like, whoa, that's what we're going to talk about at home. So I think that the Democrats, they're going to misunderstand their base there. Which leads me to believe that we're about to enter, like, the parties are going to struggle to figure out even what they are going forward. And again, this just funnels everyone right into the middle.
Well, and really all of this is just bad candidates. I mean, that's really what it really boils down to, is that
with the primary system today, you can't get a good candidate.
Yeah.
It's boom, boom.
Can't do it. And so to me, you're right about Joe Biden's legacy. If Trump wins, you're right. His legacy is trash. It is. If Trump wins and Biden should have, in 2022, after Democrats did much better than everyone thought in the midterms, he should have said, I'm not running again. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do, is be a bridge to the next thing. Let's have, start your engines kind of thing. And let's have a real primary. Trump would have gotten annihilated, because they would have picked someone like Shapiro. Kamala Harris would not be the nominee if you had an actual Democratic primary, because she's not talented enough, frankly. She's just not good at it.
I mean, and I actually think that was the biggest mistake the Democrats made. They should have at least had a sham contest.
Yeah, but no one stepped up to want to even try. So that's one of those tricky things. I think because
you're a worse candidate, you've gotta, like, she didn't win anything, and I understand why. I mean, she's not good on the stump. She's word salad sandwich.
Yeah.
So I understand why you put her in the basement and just have Hollywood try and make videos and send her out. She did a fine enough job on the debate, and it's like, that was our shot. Boom.
Yeah.
Put her to bed. We're just going to try and run this in, because they are ahead. But I got to go back to something you said here, because I think this is important. The Democrats did better than they thought they would in the midterms. Mm-hmm. My quibble with that is not that. It's that the Republicans did so much worse than they should have.
Yeah.
They picked awful candidates.
Well, yeah, that's Trump.
And then you picked up, and then you start working on terrible issues. And so this is, again, the Democrats are winning some of this stuff, but they're not winning because people are like signing up to their policy agenda. They're winning because Republicans, Republicans are campaigning with themselves, and because they're campaigning with their own team, the independents will be like, well, at least this team, like, Kamala's at least talking about housing affordability.
Yeah. And
so they'll break that way. But these are not, if she wins, she's going to be one of the least popular presidents in American history on day one, and it's only going to go down.
Oh, I agree, because I don't think she can govern very well. I mean, I don't see any history of her being able to do the job very well. And I think that's going to be detrimental. What I think will be interesting to find out is, will either party learn these lessons that you're talking about? I don't think Republicans can learn it with Trump alive. I'm just, like, being totally honest. I don't see any way that, win or lose, Trump goes away in 2028 and is not an influence on what happens in 2028. I just don't see how that is possible if he is still alive. And I'm not saying I wish him dead. I'm just saying the Republican Party will not move away from Trump until he's dead, because they can't.
This is why I love podcasts, because we can go down these threads, which are great, because I got two I want to go down real quick here. Yeah. Will they learn lessons? I think the only way the parties are going to learn the lessons is when independents start to take a chunk of their base, because right now they don't have to learn lessons. This, to me, reminds me of the big three in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. They could continue to pump out overpriced cars of crap quality that no one wanted, And then all of a sudden Toyota shows up and
Yeah.
Honda shows up. Like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then by the 90s, you could buy an American car again and be like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. So I think this is one of the things that when you talk about what the independents are going to do, I think the independents, even more than the success that they will have electorally, I think it's that the knock-on effects they will have on the parties will be tremendous. So that's the only way I see the parties reforming. But, then the next, the question you wanted to mention, just this is kind of a little rabbit hole thought experiment.
By all means.
Future of the conservative or Republican Party. I love studying British politics because it's interesting to me. I understand it, but I don't have a dog in the fight.
Yeah.
When conservatives lose in Britain, I don't really care.
Doesn't matter.
It's not, when I go over there, I have a glass of their warm beer and think it's lovely, go hiking. Oh, it's great. I don't care about your politics there, but you can learn from it. So important lessons. Number one, Margaret Thatcher started before Reagan. She got elected before Reagan.
Yeah.
Number two, Tony Blair started the third way in Britain before Bill Clinton. And so he kind of paved the way of the centrist Democrat. Then you had Brexit, Nigel Farage and Brexit. That Brexit happened before Trump.
Uh-huh.
Then you had, Liz Truss for 45 days.
Yeah.
Liz Truss and Kevin McCarthy are pretty much like, you can almost look at the same, thing there. And then what happens? Well, the Labor Party smashed the conservatives. But I think they only got 38% of the electorate or 35% of the electorate. They got a tiny percent. So they have this massive majority, but they have no mandate.
Yeah.
So there's that lesson for the Democratic Party, but the lesson for the Conservative Party there is like, now they're in the wilderness. So are they going to be what are they going to be? And they have to decide what they want to be when they grow up. And it's like, and I look at it and I see Nigel Farage right now. I'd give him, he's going to probably end up taking over. And he may have killed the Conservative Party, like this party that has been around for hundreds of years. Winston Churchill's party, it's very possible Nigel Farage killed it off and is either going to take it over or literally kill it off, and UKIP, whatever variation, becomes the future. Those are important lessons because of British politics. It's just a little bit ahead of American politics. You see the exact same thing. Again, Democrats who have a majority, but they don't know what to do with it because they have no mandate, and conservatives who are really struggling to figure out what we are the party of it. And that's where we are today.
Because tell me the Republican issue. I mean, tell me, any conservative, tell me, what does the Republican Party stand for? And they can't tell you anything other than loyalty to Donald Trump. That is all it means right now. There is nothing else.
Well, this is very personal for me because I'm in transition. I spent the last 20 years of my life, like I had a whole head of hair when I started at FreedomWorks, and I was the president of FreedomWorks, a conservative grassroots group. But look, I come from the more libertarian, limited government side of things. Like I'm more on the economic issues.
Ditto.
And I just became homeless. And so for my job, I got to get on the road and go visit you and take you to dinner and ask you for money. I mean, that's my job, like raising money. And it just morally got to the point where I'm not on this, like my values haven't really changed. And it's like, if I'm going to raise money for this institution, how do I do that if I don't believe this is going to be the right vehicle going forward? So we had made the hard decision it was better to close up shop and so I could continue to work on these values that I think are so important. But I want to be able to do this in a way where I could sit down, not just preach to converted, because I don't even the converted are converted anymore, but go reach to this next generation and talk to them about my value set, my issue sets, and why I believe limited government is in their best interests, and why even if disagree on certain social issues or certain other issues, we can still find accommodation and be very civil with each other. I think this is the politics of the future. And I look at other major contentious issues. We are still putting $1 trillion on every 100 days. I know abortion is a major issue for folks. It's a very personal issue. But if the bond market ever reacts to us overspending, that will fundamentally change all of our lives.
Yes.
All of how we buy groceries, what our kids can go to college. If we have a bond crisis, everything gets rocked. And so it's important for me to work on those issues and these colleagues that I've picked up at this independence center that we're working with, this merry band of folks. And our idea is that we want to make sure that we're taking our values that are more important than the party and starting to have those conversations, because I find I can sit down with Democrats and talk, and we actually end up agreeing on a lot of stuff, and enough stuff that it's like we could actually make progress. Like we can make progress, even with Republicans and Democrats can make progress on immigration, can make progress on healthcare reforms. There are so many things we can do that people say we can't do. And I'm just like, BS. And so I'm hoping that's what happens with this independent movement is it starts demanding, like, rather than focusing on issues that are so divisive, transgender bathrooms, things like that. Look, I know it's important. But my gosh, we are staring down economic Armageddon if we don't get our spending under control. And that's going to take both Republicans and Democrats coming together for solutions.
I agree.
And that's where we need.
Yeah, I think the problem there, though, is that what's the motivation to do that? Because most people are just punished for going down those roads right now. They don't get fundraising. They don't get on TV if they're not talking about the hot button outrage issue or the fear mongering. They don't get fundraising dollars, especially now that we've moved everything to small dollar donations. Because going back to the conversation about money, it's not just PACs. It's also that those PACs get money and from small dollar donations, and so do candidates now. It's like $5, $20. Well, the best way to do that is to scare people or to make them outraged about something. That's how Donald Trump, that's how everyone does this. They're raising $5, $20 from a lot of people instead of thousands of dollars from a few people. And it kind of goes to the populism thing. I'm with you. If you were 28 right now, you've not heard any presidential candidate, and really you haven't heard any candidate probably for any office say the words limited government. Like, you have not heard that in the last 10 years. Republicans have only gotten worse about it. Yeah.
You know it instinctively. Americans aren't stupid.
Right.
They know that the bill is coming, and they also know, that we have this revolution in technology. A lot of this technology we can embrace to help cut down on costs and to improve on things. Like it was very interesting. Like, Republicans are always talking about government, slicing government. That doesn't go well. When I start approaching independence, talk about modernizing, like, we could cut workforce and replace technology. Everyone's like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm not going to run around saying let's just kill government, but it's like, let's find efficiencies where we can. Let's where we can replace some things, where things that may be done better, out in the market. Let's do that. There's certain things that the government does. We should just do it better. And that's what people want to hear, right? They want to hear, like, how do we make the system work better, not how do you tear it down? And I think the problem, both on the far left, far right, they're just focusing on burning it down. And, I was reading an article this morning about someone who I have a ton of intellectual respect for, because he's a student of history, but I disagree on a lot of his outcomes, Steve Bannon. And there's an article about Steve Bannon's armies coming to town. And it's interesting to me is that most of that army is going to be like, baby boomers and above. And you've got this army but the millennials are the ones who are actually going to have to live in this economy for 20 years. And so I think what you're looking at is a shift between these older folks that are upset about changes for a variety of reasons, and the younger folks who are like not as upset, but worried about these, $1 trillion deficits. There's going to be a conflict between these groups. Yeah. And so I look at the party, that's a hell of a fight to have within the GOP between those various ranks, and even a heck of a fight within the Democratic ranks. But again, you look at the numbers, the millennials have the numbers. They're going to be around longer. They're the ones who are entering into their economic prime years. They're going to have a bigger say on how American politics goes. And again, this is a group that is more tolerant of each other's differences than the older generations. And so this is why I'm so optimistic. And so the people who are listening to you, I'm sure that if they're listening to your podcast and they're still, they're doing their yard work, listening and enjoying our conversation here, it's up to them to solve all of this problem. It's really your listeners who are going to be the ones that are going to say enough is enough on the hyper-partisanship. Enough is enough on a lot of this. We need to take our candidates more seriously. And it's going to be your listeners who are going to drive a more serious candidate.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of hope that Democrats can shift to changing how government works, because so much of their constituency is government employees. I just don't I think that that's going to be that'd be a really hard shift for the Democratic Party to make, because most of the bureaucracy at federal levels and at local levels, teachers unions, all these kind of things are very, very Democrat. I mean, like 90% Democrat. And it's going to be really hard for them to go, oh yeah, we're going to reduce the size of an agency's employees when those are our voters, or to take on teachers unions or talk about education. So
is so popular.
Yes, very popular.
It's like the more you get into it, and it's because what we're essentially telling you is that everything in your world, remember, I think we talked about 50 flavors of peanut butter.
Right.
So everything in your world is customized now.
Yep.
But what I do know is I look at my friends. Several of my friends are dealing with issues where their kids are autistic. Mm-hmm. Several of my friends are dealing with kids that are late developers. Several of my friends are dealing with kids that are like frickin' geniuses. And it's like, we should have school customized for each one of these kids.
Yeah.
Yet we're just going to send them through the same Prussian Bismarckian system. No, we need, if you want that type of school, you should have that type of school. If you want a micro school, you should have that. If you want religious education, whether it's, Christian or I think you should have that. We should be encouraging a wide variety of it. This is so popular.
Yeah.
Yeah. Democrat Party can never do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the big splitting issue I think you could have.
Oh, I agree.
It gets back to that relationship with government.
Yeah. And going back to before we started recording, we were talking about how you mentioned parents, I think, and that would go to the education thing for sure. There's a commonality there, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. When you have kids, everyone wants their kid to be educated.
We're all tired.
Everyone feels
We're all this and that. I mean, we are all scared to death about, I think about the challenges we face. Like, my parents didn't worry about porn on phones and things like that. They didn't worry about their kids getting extorted on, on social media. Like, these are all things that we have to worry about that our parents never even worried about.
Right.
And I think that kind of binds us together, because I don't have the solutions to all of this. But when I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat, if you can help me keep my kid in bed and not wake up at 2 a.m. and come in my bed, I'm going to listen to you.
Right.
Because, we're frequently having our 3.5-year-old crawling in the middle of the night. Like, so I think there's also, with parents, you also have, you have hope, right? Our kids are going to have to live in all of this. It's enough for us to live in this.
Right.
But when we're starting to talk about, we're starting to talk like, I was really hoping we would never have to have a conversation on things like nuclear war ever again.
Right.
And the fact that that's coming back into our conversation, like, those are my kids.
Yeah.
Those are that I love more than anything. And I think that kind of binds us together so that's, again, I meet with parents. They're very practical on their issue sets because it matters. It really matters to them.
Okay, so before I let you go, here's kind of my last deep thought question.
Yeah.
Leading up to the election, I get lots of questions from friends about, well, who you're voting for, or what do you think, and my answer is often, I don't think either one of these people for president specifically deserve my vote. I'm kind of one of those people that I didn't vote for anyone in 2020 on president level or 2016 because I just didn't think either one of them deserved my vote.
Right.
Where do you think independent people who consider themselves, whether it's that they feel centrist or that they feel just like they don't align with the parties, what do you think the best signal they can send with their vote is, especially in like a swing state? Is it vote for who you think is best? Is it split your ticket so it's pretty clear that here's, sure, Donald Trump won the presidency, but Democrats won the Senate. What do you think is the best way to show the parties specifically, hey, wake up?
So maybe a different take on all of this, because I know I've got people who are agonizing over this right now. And I live in Virginia. Virginia's going to go for Harris. So it doesn't matter what I do.
Right.
And I live in Northern Virginia, which is one of your deepest blue areas. So it's like my vote's just, I actually look at the county issues because that's the
all the local stuff. Vote for sure. Yeah. I'm in Oklahoma is the same thing. We will not have a county that goes blue. I mean, it won't happen.
Here's the most controversial thing I'll probably say. It might not matter this cycle. What? This
No,
is the
that's
most
fine.
important election of
No,
your
it's
lifetime.
never the most important election. I hate that. That's my least favorite thing.
It's nauseating because what I think here's the most likely scenario. I mean, and I do think our model does give an advantage to Harris in Pennsylvania and an advantage to Harris in Michigan, which means that's pretty much it.
That's it. If she wins Pennsylvania, unless she loses all the other states.
Just calling the shot, it's like she's got more money on her ground game. All the polls show her slightly ahead. I'm not saying Trump can't win. I mean, it could be a Republican trifecta. Possible. Not likely. And I think it's like you're at that part of the game. It's like, what, the 8th inning now and you're down 5-3? So it's not out, but you got to put runs on the board real fast. And I just don't know if Trump's got enough, even if he surges per se, I don't know if it's enough to get him over the top. So, so I most likely think Kamala wins. I most likely think that the Democrats, because of that, they probably pick up a few, like 5 seats in the House. So it's going to be an ungovernable majority.
Yeah.
Whatever way.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Democrats or Republicans should take up Montana and they should pick up West Virginia, and that should be enough for the House. Sherrod Brown is, every poll I still see him up 3 or 4. Like the guy's a political. I come from Cleveland, and it's like he speaks Cleveland to Ohio. So I could easily see, just looking at all the numbers, it's most likely Republicans take the Senate. Now, I did mention this Osborne versus Deb Fischer thing in Nebraska, which could be. I'm watching that one closely, right? And then I'm also Ted Cruz. Ooh, Ted's playing this one real tight.
It's tight.
I still think he gets it.
I think he does too. I think so. I think all the talk of Texas and Florida flipping blue on the Senate seats, to me, it seems more like Democrats knowing they're losing Montana and so they're in West Virginia. And so they're like, it's a desperate Hail Mary. It's like, well, maybe we can flood. Yeah, it
is. And that's why it's so funny to me that the one place that everyone's looking, because the Republicans thought they could do a feint in Maryland because they had a popular Republican that's not going anywhere. But so anyway, look, I'm on the record for saying at this point, I still think it's going to be Dems take 2 of the 3, Republicans take the Senate. And so, but the majorities that we're talking about are just so slim. And so this is why it's like, I'm trying to take the pressure off of people. The president is most likely going to be able to do things through the regulatory state, which is bad, I'm not saying that's good. There's a lot of damage that both a Trump or a Harris president can do, but it can be contained. Yeah. And you would much rather have legislation than regulatory. So I just think that what you're looking at is this election will come down as kind of a nothing burger in the sense of like the dysfunction continues.
I completely agree. I don't.
So people like my sister who are agonizing on who they should vote for, just vote, flip a coin, do what you want to do what you need to do. I don't think there's any, I think the signal that's going to be sent is just the unpopularity and the dysfunction that's coming out of this. Yeah. And that's why I actually think 2026 is going to be a significant election because I think you're going to see the independents start to rise there. And depending on what happens there, that could completely redo what we started talking about earlier of what happens in 2028. And that's where I think elections are going to start getting a little bit more interesting for Americans.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of scenarios where the Democratic Party really has to ask themselves a lot of questions after this election. Because if Kamala loses, I think they'll just blame it all on Joe Biden. I mean, which is fair. I think it's totally fair to say, look, if you would have dropped out 2 years ago, we could have had a real primary. We could have beaten Donald Trump. Donald Trump's kind of in a similar situation. I think that even with Kamala Harris coming in the race, this was Trump's to lose, and I think he is losing it. I don't think Kamala Harris is winning this race right now. I think Trump can't stay on message for long enough to say the things that that voters want to hear. He wants to keep talking about that the election was stolen in 2020, and people don't believe that for the most part. A
little bit more discipline, he could have walked away with this whole thing.
I think really right now.
Struck me is they knew, like my predictions from 2 years ago, just look at the numbers. I didn't think Biden, I have op-eds written on this, that Biden will not be the nominee. Now, I thought it was going to be Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer, so I was wrong on who the Democrats ended up going with. But my, oh my, how could they have not been prepared for that? They spent 2 weeks complaining about the fact that Biden got dropped. It's like, You knew this was going to happen and be the most likely scenario. You got to prepare for it. It's politics. It's not fair. It's politics.
Well, and that's Nikki Haley was right. I mean, like, you go back to the Republican primary and it was the same thing. It's like everyone knew these two dudes were old and no one liked them. And she was right. The first person to replace that old person on the ticket might win. Now, we don't know for sure if they'll win, but it certainly is the only wind at Kamala's back is that she's not Donald Trump and she's not Joe Biden.
You know, they're having her in her basement running this campaign and doing safe,
right?
Because that's what you do. Now, I mean, I know our time is up, but this is the last quote that I think is important to inflate everything. Former Congressman out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, Peter Meyer, and I had a really interesting conversation about the future of independence, the future of the Republican Party. Sat at a diner for hours. It was great. And he said to me this, I always think of this quote, and I think he's okay with saying this. He's like, he told me the Republican Party will never change unless it's challenged from the outside. And the Democrats will never change until the Republican Party changes. So if you are conservative and you're like, I'm not happy with where the GOP is going, it is incumbent upon you to help drive these changes because, again, you have the power to change the future of the GOP. Now, I'm going to be deploying strategies through the independent channel. But ultimately, what I hope to do is not just, create a home for independence, but create a home for independence that helps fundamentally reshift the Republican and the Democratic parties back towards, let's say, more of a 1990s consensus.
Well, and to just maybe have some principles that are there that are, like I said, right now, it doesn't feel like either party really, Democrats have more of those kind of things because they're definitely pro-choice. They're definitely, they have a few more lists. Republicans, I cannot talk because I guess I'm out of talking energy. They just don't have a policy platform right now, really. It's essentially whatever Donald Trump says we go with. That can change day to day. And I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I have this podcast. That's why it's called The Homeless Conservative, is because I feel the same way as you do. I feel like I've had these positions for a long time. They haven't changed, but the party has. And I think the only way to change that is from the bottom up. You've got to...
There's seasons, and the homeless conservative in the next 10 years will end up being one of the, as a cohort, the dominant cohort in American politics.
That would be lovely.
You're going to have 5 million downloads every day. That's what the future's going to be.
And beyond the podcast, it would just be nice if there were actual conservatives that voted that way and didn't just play the tribal stuff that we've been doing for the last while, where we end up slinking back and saying, well, Donald Trump's good enough and checking the box for him. And I just feel like if we keep doing that, both parties, but especially Republicans, because that's the party I care more about. I think if we keep doing that and just saying like the Republican is always better than a Democrat, I think that's becoming wrong. It's a wrong way to think about it. You've got some really, really bad candidates. And that's why we're losing races. And to me, until the Republican Party wakes up and realizes, hey, these Trumpy candidates consistently lose, especially if Trump loses this year. If Trump loses in November, he'll have lost in 2018 midterms, 2020, 22, 24. He got lucky in 16, essentially, would be all that happened. And so to me, at some point, you got to cut him off and say, you've lost over and over.
There's some other things that there's also no one talking about that losing. It's very possible the Republicans lose control of the Arizona State House and the Pennsylvania State House this election. Mm-hmm. And if you have Democratic governors and then you have Democrats, you're going to start seeing those states start to shift in different ways. Yep. So the damage, look, I'm a happy warrior. There's damage.
A lot of damage.
There's cannonballs below the waterline. But I look at change. This is the way change happens. You take your shots, you take your damage. And then again, it's going to be your listeners that come up and say, you don't know more. We're going to kind of start to collectivize and come together a little bit to kind of make our voices heard. And when that happens, just the way the demographics work, my guess is your audience tends to be a slight bit younger than your average GOP member. And then that's just the natural transition. And so our values and principles may seem like they're a little tarnished right now. These problems we mentioned, the debt and the deficit, healthcare, we're the only ones with solutions.
Yeah.
We're the only ones thinking. So guess what? When the problems come, we've got the solutions. So, hopefully we can get ahead of the problems a little bit. But
where they're not catastrophes. Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. But ultimately, we know the ball's coming back to us, and we just got to get ready for it.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Adam. Really enjoyed the conversation. I would love to have you on again sometime. We will see what happens in a few weeks. We are just...
Let's have a recap after the election, because I can predict right now the story of the election is going to be which way the independent voter ended up swinging in these crucial states.
Oh yeah, and, there's no way it's not that, because it's going to be tens of thousands of votes in a handful of states. It's going to be very, very close. I've said over and over again, I don't think you're going to go to bed on November 5th and know who won. For sure.
I don't think either. By the way, there's going to be recounts and challenges.
Yeah, and
we'll have an indication at least of what happens.
Yeah, I think we will too. So we will see what happens. Thanks, Adam, for coming on. I'll catch you another time for sure.
Sounds great. Thank you.
My thanks again to Adam Brandon from theindependentcenter.org. Check out their site for sure. There's some really great information on there. And I will definitely take Adam up on his offer to come back on the show after the election so we can talk about what's next once we actually know the layout of the White House and Congress come January 2025. So thank you again for listening. If you enjoyed the conversation, consider going to thehomelessconservative.com and signing up for my email list so that I can keep you in the know. I promise I'm not going to spam you all the time. The other thing you can do that really helps me a lot is share the episode or some short content on Instagram or YouTube with a friend that might also find some value in it. That helps me a ton. Thank you again. I will catch you next week.